Greetings, I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to build this Tamiya German 20mm Flakvierling 38 Mitst R52. That last part is real catchy, just rolls right off the tongue. Anyway, this is a 1/35th scale model, which I'm led to believe is quite old, from the 70s I've been told. Obviously I didn't know this when I bought it because I just buy things on impulse, but I figured it was probably kind of old and it was priced accordingly, which is to say very cheap. But it is still a Tamiya kit, so it can't be that bad, right? The back of the box is upside down. That's better. You can see illustrations of the kit in both its deployed configuration and mounted on its trailer, which is of course included in the kit. There's also a couple of pictures of other kits I presume to be or have been available that use the same gun. Very good. What's in the box? This. It doesn't look too different to a modern Tamiya kit. I guess if it isn't broken. The kit comes on 3 sprues moulded in a dark grey plastic. I have to admit, there's a little bit more here than I was expecting there to be. That's not a problem though, of course. Looking at these parts, I don't get the impression that this is a 1970s tooling. I'm not saying that it's not, but the parts are quite neat and tidy looking. Not quite as sharp and nice as the more recent Tamiya stuff I've built, but definitely not bad. There are more mould lines and little bits of flash than I would expect of those modern Tamiya kits, but compared to ancient, say, Airfix, this is awesome. I'm sure this kit isn't super detailed by any stretch of the imagination, and it's probably got some inaccuracies, but I think it's kind of forgivable if it's that old. And it does look decent enough anyway, at least in my opinion. In addition to the plastic, the box contains this sheet of fascinating reading that I would bet nobody ever reads, myself included. No decals are included, but there are 2 sets of instructions. One in Japanese, which I don't understand, so that one's not much help to me. Fortunately, I can read English, a little bit. The instructions are the scroll type that I'm not especially fond of, though they are of course usable, and they were easy enough to understand and follow. There's not much more to say about them really, so let's get to the part where we glue stuff together. The first step is to glue these 2 bits together, which I did before hitting record. This is because I'm very good at what I do and not because I'm bad. The part does go together well enough. That can then be glued onto this curved platey thing. Very technical terms. The fit wasn't perfect, so I applied some pressure to try and get the joint as gap-free as I could. Doesn't look like much yet, so let's keep gluing bits of plastic to it. I glue 3 flat rectangular panels to the bottom. Is this the bottom? I think it is. Anyway, they go underneath the whatever it is I just glued on. There is keying here, but you will have to do a little bit of nudging and pressure applying to get them to line up nice and neatly. You might find it helpful to use your work surface to get the parts nice and straight, assuming that your work surface is flat. I then glue this side plate on. There's also keying for this, as you can see. There's a bit of a gap which I'm not really sure should be there or not, but it is there, so I'll deal with it, I guess. The next thing to add is this cylindery bit. I'm not super convinced that this is necessary, but it's not going to hurt anybody if I include it, so why not? Then I add another platey part to the side. Simple enough. I spend a bit of time holding it lovingly and applying pressure, then I add this other plate that curves inward. I did have to do a tiny bit of trimming to the top of this part to get it to fit, but it did fit in the end. Next I glue this thing. I'm sure it serves some function. It goes on the bottom of the assembly like so. There's another one of these for the other side as well. Then on the top of the assembly goes this piece of gun shielding. The gun sight will look through the middle of this. It kind of ends up looking like some sort of weird mechanical dog's head with 2 ears on top. I'm imaginative. In here, behind the shield, I install this box. It does box things. What those box things are, I have no idea. At any rate, it's pretty simple to put into place. Next to that, I glue this arm. This will be a mount for the gun sight and the linkages that keep it aligned with the guns. Next, a couple of panels go down here. I know, very descriptive. These were a little bit fiddly to get lined up, but the third plate that goes on the front should help you get everything sorted out neatly. It still took a bit of nudging to get it where it is, but it doesn't look too bad. Now to work on the guns. Well, the mountings for the guns really, I guess. This is a simple matter of gluing two cylinder things into the appropriate mounting holes. I've no idea what these cylinders are for, maybe they're gun recuperators or something, but they're easy enough to get into place. Next come the guns themselves. These mount onto the longish oval doovers on the plate. There are 2 guns per plate, and they should both be oriented the same way. This is about as simple to do as it looks. Most of the work is actually in cleaning up the parts, which I've obviously not shown because it's not all that interesting. There's obviously 2 sets of these guns and their mounts, so don't just make one of them, that's not enough. This little curved piece of gun shield slides over the 2 guns and can then be glued into place. Do be sure to use the correct parts for either side. The instructions will help you figure out which is which. Now we move on to the gun side. I very carefully put some glue into the hole for the mounting pin here. Then I slide that pin through the arm part. If you don't get glue on it, it should move freely. Next I glue on the gun sight itself. This is easy enough, and I'm pretty sure that I got it lined up straight enough. If I didn't, oh well, I guess this gun is going to do more missing than it should. I mount the guns next, but first we need to attach this bar. At this point I don't worry too much about getting it straight, because that will be done later. I slide one of the gun assemblies through the middle of the central part, for lack of better words. Then I add glue to the keyed axle part that will link in with a similar part on the other gun assembly. I slide it together, making sure that the bar at the front is in the correct position, and then I apply pressure to make sure everything bonds nicely. It's really starting to take shape now. I then glue the linkage to the pin on the outer side of the gun sight arm thing. Probably not the technical term, but whatever. Before that sets up too much, I hook the loop on the other end of the linkage around the corresponding pin on the gun part. The instructions suggest heating up a screwdriver and using that to melt this pin down to lock the linkage in place, and still have it be movable. I'm just going to add glue because I don't feel much need for the gun elevation function. Moving on, I add these pedals, or maybe they're just footrests. Whatever they are, they go onto this plate and are only a little bit fiddly to get into place. Then comes this large chunk. This is pretty easy to put on, unless you're putting it on upside down, I guess. Just don't do that. Then I insert that assembly here into the bottom of the gun mechanism bit. The fit is pretty decent, though the plate with the pedals did need a bit of the old nudging. Then I make a seat. There are actually 3 seats in this kit, so I figured why not make all 3 of them at once. There's pretty much nothing to this. Next I glue together this thingamabob. This is part of the gun elevation system. And why not glue that into place now? It's a bit of a tight squeeze for my fingers, and tweezers might have been a better choice here, but I do manage to get it into place on the mounting knob intended for it. Then I add glue and let it seep in and bond the part into place. No falling off for this thing. Adding the control wheels seemed like a pretty good next step, so I did that. These are keyed, so they should only go on one way. I'm not sure why they need to be in one specific position, but that's the way they are. I did have to do a little bit of nudging with my knife, again because of the limited space, but both of them go on easily enough. And now the gun can be elevated, depressed, and traversed, which I've heard is pretty helpful if you're trying to shoot at stuff that is moving. The gunner's seat comes next. This mounts onto the end of that bar part that the pedally things were attached to. There is a little bit of play in this, so you will have to fiddle with it a bit to get it to sit nice and level, but I don't think that's too much of a problem. I then glue this inner hingy platey part to the inside of the gun shield. It's pretty easy to see when these parts are lined up correctly, and there is keying, though not so much for the vertical positioning. Just check that the angled end of the inner part lines up with the angle of the shield. Next, a nice rack. I mean, I've seen nicer, but this will function well enough. Making this is just a matter of gluing the magazines in place. The 2 end parts are different to each other and the 2 inner ones, so make sure not to mix them up. This looks decent enough, though I do think it's a bit weird to have a gun or guns like this being magazine fed, but I guess they had their reasons. Next, I attached the base of the gun to the gun. Yep. It was a little bit fiddly to get this into the proper location, but once I got there it stayed there with friction, though obviously it is better to glue it into place for a more permanent bond. Onto this part of the frame we can glue the magazine racks. These are conveniently located right under the slots in the guns for said magazines. And why not install some of those now? There's one of these for each gun, which makes sense, and they should be glued into place such that they curve towards the front of the gun. This is of course about as simple as it looks, and it does end up looking pretty interesting if you ask me. I mean, you probably didn't, but I'm telling you anyway. Next, I add whatever these little bar things are. There's one of these on either side of the gun, and they're not too tricky to install. After that, I install a pole for a seat, and then, let's get crazy, and add a seat to that seat pole. Wild, I know. This one is turned a little bit to the side just to make it kind of look, well, lived in isn't really the right term. Used? I think you know what I mean. I did similar to the one on the other side. Those loaders probably deserve seats. I imagine it being hard work swapping those magazines out all the time. And that's the main gun assembly completed. Now to build its base. This is pretty straightforward. You glue the little support feet into the bottom. I guess that's kind of obvious. They would be a little bit useless on the upper side. I'm not sure if they should all be lined up the same way as each other, but I've done that anyway because of reasons. Then come these, I guess they're latches of some sort? I don't know. They go into the upper mounting hole above the feet. I'm pretty sure they should all be facing out and away from the center of the frame. Then the main gun assembly can be attached. This has a pair of locking tabs, similar to a lot of tank turrets, which will keep it in place, so there's no need for gluing it together. Well, you can if you want, I'm not going to stop you. I've also dry fitted the gun shields. I figured leaving these off until I get around to painting this is a pretty good idea. The kit includes a trailer, which I guess is optional, but I wanted to build it, so I did. I start by assembling the wheels. There's an inner wheelie bit that is glued to the inside of the larger wheel part, and that's very simple to do, as you can see. This is followed by a rim part, which is also quite easy to get into place. It would be a little bit silly to have big open-backed wheels on a trailer like this, where it would be very visible. The wheels ended up looking pretty decent. In order to install those wheels though, we'll need to add the suspension, so that's next. This leaf spring part is pretty simple to attach to the insides of the frame like so. Obviously there's one for each side, because if there wasn't, it wouldn't function very well as a trailer. A towing hitch loop thingy will also improve trailer function. This part is also very easy to get into place, as is this plate, which goes nicely into the two guide holes for it. I guess this is for standing on and possibly for protecting that little cylinder. Next come the mudguards. There is keying to make sure these go into the correct spot, but it can be a bit tricky to see which one goes on which side. I used the stowage box parts as a guide for this. A little extra glue on the inside to create a stronger bond, and they're on. Obviously, again, there's one of these for each side for equal mudguarding. Then the stowage boxes I just mentioned can go into place. You can probably see how they would look strange if you put them on wrong, and that's why they work as guides to let you know which mudguard goes on which side. Now seems like a really good time to attach some wheels. These go in the obvious location and are not hard at all to install. Good times. Then we have to assemble this thing. Whatever it is, it's comprised of 3 parts. The base, a little clippy looking thing, and this outer part, with what appears to be a folded up crank. There are 2 of these, and when they're assembled, can be glued into place on the rear of the frame like so. Not especially challenging. And with that, the trailer is completed. Clearly this isn't meant to hold the gun in this configuration, but that didn't stop me from trying to put them together anyway. Flawless. That's the Tamiya 20mm Flakvierling 38 in 1/35th scale completed, and I'm pretty happy with how it's turned out. Sure, it's not perfect. It is after all quite an old model, but compared with some of the other very old kits I've encountered, this one is pretty damn good. I'm sure it's lacking in some detail, particularly compared with some of the more modern Tamiya models, but for the price that you pay for this, which probably shouldn't really be a lot at all, you shouldn't really have high expectations anyway. That said, I think it's decent enough, and I'm actually thinking of picking up another one of these and using it for parts on my next post-apocalyptic build. I think it would be cool to have that gun. Maybe not the entire thing, but the gun parts at least. No promise that's actually going to happen, After all, I might not be able to find another one of these. At the least, it is something interesting to think about. The build was pretty simple. A lot of the time spent working on it was actually spent removing mold lines and cleaning bits up, though the mold lines were still better than some other kits I've seen, even some more modern kits. Some of the fitting was a little bit janky, but not too much. Nothing really worth complaining about. And there wasn't anything that prevented this from being enjoyable to put together. You could build this the way that I did, with the trailer separate, which you could use to make a diorama of this thing set up and in action, but you can also build it in transport mode, mounted to the trailer. So there are some choices here, which is always nice. It did take me a couple of streams to get this built, though streaming and recording video does add a lot of time to any build, so without any of those distractions, you could probably whip this thing together rather quickly. Speaking of distractions, if you want to watch me build stuff like this live on stream, feel free to head on over to twitch.tv/Herbert_Erpaderp, or simply follow the convenient link in the description. Give me a follow and you'll be notified when I go live, and then you can come hang out with us and Bevo. Look out for Bevo, he's a bad egg. It'll be good times. Okay, so what do you think of this Flakvierling? Have you built this kit yourself? Is there a different model of this weapon that you prefer? Let me know in the comment section below. Or if you have built one and you want to share pictures, or just pictures of any other model you'd like to share, feel free to drop by our Discord server and share some images. That would be rad. Also, don't forget to subscribe, follow, ring the bell, become a YouTube member or patron, and all the other things you do on YouTube and social media. Links to all of my things are in the description below. And as always, I shall return soon, so until then, be excellent to each other, and thank you for watching. Farewell.